poor student saved a dying man. Unaware. He's a multi-billionaire. What he did for her shock. Everyone. The rain hammered down on Bennett Avenue as 22-year-old Autumn Hayes knelt beside the collapsed man in the alley. Her trembling fingers pressed against his neck, searching for a pulse. Blood pooled beneath his expensive suit, mixing with the dirty rainwater, and his lips were turning blue. She had $17 in her bank account, a statistics exam in 6 hours, and absolutely no business stopping to help a stranger when she was already running late for her night shift at the diner. But here she was, ripping off her only winter coat to press against the gushing wound in his side. Her phone wedged between her shoulder and ear as she screamed the address to the 911 operator. What Autumn didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know as she watched this dying man's eyes flutter closed, was that the elderly stranger bleeding out in her arms was Theodore Whitmore, founder and CEO of Whitmore Industries, worth an estimated $47 billion. And what he was about to do for her would not just change her life, but shock everyone who thought they knew what gratitude looked like. "Stay with me," Autumn begged, her voice cracking as the man's breathing became shallower. Rain plastered her dark hair to her face, and her nursing student instincts kicked in despite her exhaustion. She'd been awake for 31 hours straight, juggling classes, 2 part-time jobs, and studying, but none of that mattered now. "Please, just stay with me. Help is coming." The man's eyes opened slightly, pale gray and unfocused. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "Don't try to talk," Autumn said, pressing harder on the wound. Her coat was soaked through with blood now, ruined. That coat had cost her 3 months of saving, purchased from a thrift store and cherished like gold. "Just breathe. Keep breathing." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The man's hand suddenly gripped her wrist with surprising strength, and his eyes focused on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was trying to tell her something, his mouth forming words she couldn't hear over the rain and her own pounding heart. "I've got you," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "I've got you." Then the paramedics were there, pulling her back, taking over. Autumn stumbled to her feet, watching as they loaded the stranger onto a gurney and rushed him into the ambulance. A police officer approached her, asking questions she answered automatically while her mind reeled. She gave them her name, her phone number, explained that she'd just been walking to work when she heard someone groaning in the alley. "Did you see who did this?" the officer asked. Autumn shook her head. "He was already down when I found him. I just tried to help." The officer nodded, scribbling notes. "You probably saved his life, miss. That kind of bleeding, another few minutes and—" He didn't finish the sentence. After they left, Autumn stood alone in the rain, staring at her blood-soaked hands and the ruined coat lying in the puddle. She checked her phone. 40 minutes until her shift started. She was drenched, exhausted. And now she had no coat for the walk home later when temperatures would drop below freezing. She made it to the diner 3 minutes late. Her manager, Rita, took one look at her and sighed. "Rough night?" "You could say that." Autumn tied on her apron with shaking hands that still smelled like copper, despite scrubbing them raw in the diner bathroom. That night passed in a blur of grease-stained plates, demanding customers, and the bone-deep exhaustion that had become Autumn's constant companion. She thought about the man occasionally, wondering if he'd survived, but mostly she focused on getting through her shift so she could catch 3 hours of sleep before her 8 a.m. class. 3 days later, she'd almost forgotten about the incident entirely. Life had a way of drowning out everything except immediate survival when you were working 60 hours a week while carrying 18 credit hours. Autumn was in the university library, squinting at her laptop screen and calculating how many meals she could skip this week to afford the textbook she desperately needed when her phone rang with an unknown number. "Is this Autumn Hayes?" a professional female voice asked. "Yes. This is Jennifer Caldwell. I'm calling from Whitmore Industries. We'd like to arrange a meeting with you regarding an incident that occurred on Bennett Avenue 3 nights ago." Autumn's stomach dropped. "Is he okay? The man I helped, is he alive?" There was a pause, then warmth entered the woman's voice. "Mr. Whitmore is recovering well, thanks to you. He's very eager to thank you in person. Would you be available to visit him tomorrow afternoon at Mercy General Hospital?" Whitmore. The name tickled something in Autumn's memory, but she was too tired to place it. I have classes until 3 and work at 4. What time would work for you? Autumn almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. Her life wasn't about what worked for her. It was about cramming obligations into every available minute. I really don't need to. Please, Ms. Hayes. Mr. Whitmore has been quite insistent. He wants to thank you personally. Something in the woman's tone made Autumn relent. Maybe it was simple curiosity, or maybe it was the bone-deep loneliness of her existence that made even a brief human connection feel precious. 3:15 tomorrow, but I can only stay 20 minutes. Perfect. I'll text you the details. The next afternoon, Autumn navigated the sterile corridors of Mercy General, still wearing her classroom clothes, jeans with a patch on one knee, a faded university sweatshirt, and sneakers held together with duct tape. She'd pulled her hair into a messy ponytail and hadn't bothered with makeup because she didn't own any. The nurses at the station directed her to the private wing, and with each step, she grew more confused. This wasn't the regular hospital. This was where they put VIPs. Outside room 847, 2 men in dark suits stood guard. They checked her ID against a list before allowing her entry, and that's when the first thread of understanding began to unspool in Autumn's tired mind. The room was enormous, more like a luxury hotel suite than a hospital room. Flowers covered every surface, and in the bed, propped up with pillows and looking far more alive than he had any right to be, was the man from the alley. Ms. Hayes, he said, and his voice was strong despite the IV lines and monitoring equipment. Please come in. Autumn stepped forward hesitantly. You're okay. Thanks to you. He gestured to a chair beside the bed. Please sit. I'm Theodore Whitmore, and I owe you my life. The name hit her like a freight train. Theodore Whitmore, Whitmore Industries. She'd written a case study on his company last semester in her business class. He was one of the richest men in America, a self-made billionaire who'd built a technology empire from nothing. I didn't know, she blurted out. I just saw someone who needed help. Exactly. His gray eyes studied her with that same intensity she remembered from the alley. You had no idea who I was, what I could do for you, yet you stopped. You used your own coat to save my life, ruined it beyond repair. My assistant tells me you're a student at Central University? Yes, sir, nursing program. Working how many jobs? Autumn blinked at the directness of the question. 2, 3 if you count the research assistance I do for Professor Martinez, but that's only a few hours a week. And you're how old? 22. Theodore nodded slowly as if confirming something he already knew. I was attacked 3 nights ago by people who wanted to rob me. They stabbed me and left me to die in that alley. I've spent the last 3 days being visited by people I've known for decades. Business partners, supposed friends, family members. And do you know what I've realized? Autumn shook her head, uncomfortable with where this was going. Not one of them would have done what you did. Not one of them would have sacrificed their coat, been late to work, risked getting involved. They would have called 911 from a safe distance and kept walking. His voice grew quiet. You don't know me. You gained nothing from helping me. In fact, you lost something. That coat meant something to you, didn't it? Autumn's throat tightened. She cried over that stupid coat. Actually cried because it had represented months of careful saving, and now winter was coming, and she had nothing. It was just a coat. Don't lie to me, Ms. Hayes. I've had people investigate you over the past 3 days. Yes, I know how invasive that sounds, but bear with me. You're carrying $47,000 in student loans. Your mother died of cancer 2 years ago, leaving you with an additional $89,000 in medical debt that you've been paying off $50 at a time. Your father's whereabouts are unknown. You live in a studio apartment in the Riverside district that costs $650 a month, which is cheap because the building has a rat problem and the heat doesn't always work. You eat 1 full meal a day, maybe 2 if you can sneak food from the diner. Your GPA is 3.8 despite working yourself to exhaustion. And that coat? You bought it 3 months ago for $35 and considered it a luxury purchase? Autumn's face burned with humiliation. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand that I see you, really see you, not as some nameless good Samaritan, but as a young woman who's fighting tooth and nail just to survive, and who still stopped to save a dying stranger. Theodore reached for a folder on his bedside table and winced, his hand going to his bandaged side. "You shouldn't move," Autumn said automatically, her nursing training kicking in. He smiled slightly. "Always taking care of others, even now. This folder contains several documents. The first is a check for $150,000. That's to cover your student loans, your mother's medical debt, and give you some breathing room." Autumn's vision swam. She couldn't have heard that correctly. "I can't." "You can, and you will, because if you don't accept it, I'll simply pay off the debts directly, and you'll have no say in the matter." His tone was matter-of-fact, but his eyes were gentle. The second document is an offer of employment. Whitmore Industries has an extensive medical division, and we're always looking for bright young nursing students. Upon completion of your degree, you'll have a position waiting for you with a starting salary of $89,000 a year, full benefits, and tuition reimbursement if you choose to pursue further education. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm not finished." He held up a hand. "The third document is the deed to a 2-bedroom condo in the Parkview district. It's fully paid off in your name. You'll never have to worry about rent again." The room tilted. Autumn gripped the arms of her chair, certain she was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "It's real, and there's one more thing." Theodore's voice grew softer. "When I was lying in that alley bleeding out, I wasn't thinking about my company or my fortune or my legacy. I was thinking about my granddaughter, Lily. She's 23, just a year older than you. She died 3 years ago from complications during a surgery that a nurse botched because she was overworked and exhausted. Working 3 jobs just like you because the hospital was understaffed and underpaid their nurses." Tears spilled down Autumn's cheeks before she could stop them. Lily wanted to help people. She was kind, genuinely kind, in a way that's rare in my world. When you pressed your hands against my wound and begged me to stay alive, you sounded just like her. You have that same desperation to save people, even at cost to yourself. His voice cracked slightly. "I can't bring my granddaughter back, but I can make sure that young women like you and like her don't have to sacrifice their health, their safety, and their futures just to care for others." "I don't know what to say," Autumn whispered. "Say yes. Accept these gifts, not as charity, but as what you've earned. You saved my life. Let me give you yours back." Autumn's mind flashed back to every moment of the past 2 years, collapsing from exhaustion in the library, eating cereal for dinner 5 nights in a row because it was all she could afford, choosing between buying her textbooks or keeping the electricity on, studying by flashlight when she couldn't pay the bill. She thought about the constant, grinding anxiety that woke her at 3 a.m., calculating and recalculating her finances, trying to figure out how she'd make it to graduation. She thought about her mother's last words. "Promise me you'll finish school, baby. Promise me you'll become the nurse you always wanted to be." "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I accept. And thank you. Thank you so much." Theodore smiled, and for the first time since entering the room, he looked his age, exhausted but relieved. "Thank you, Autumn. You gave me my life. This is the least I can do." The story should have ended there, with a neat bow tied around a feel-good narrative of a billionaire's gratitude. But Theodore Whitmore was a man who'd built an empire through bold moves and long-term thinking, and he wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, Autumn was still reeling from her new reality. The check had cleared. She'd stared at her bank balance for 20 minutes, certain there'd been a mistake. Her debts were paid. She'd quit one of her jobs. She'd moved into the condo, a beautiful space with actual heating and windows that didn't rattle in the wind. For the first time in 2 years, she'd slept for 8 hours straight and woken without an alarm blaring in her ear. She was studying at the kitchen table, an actual table, not a broken folding chair, when her phone rang. Jennifer Caldwell again. "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Whitmore would like to invite you to a press conference tomorrow at 2 p.m. Would you be available?" "A press conference? About what?" "Mr. Whitmore will explain everything. It's, well, you'll want to be there." The press conference was held at the Whitmore Industries headquarters, a gleaming tower of steel and glass in the heart of downtown. Autumn wore new clothes, still modest, still her style. but without holes or patches, and felt completely out of place as Jennifer led her through corridors filled with expensive art and purposeful executives. The conference room was packed with journalists, cameras, and reporters. Theodore sat at a table at the front, looking healthier than he had in the hospital, but still moving carefully. When he saw Autumn, he smiled and gestured for her to join him at the table. "I can't sit up there," she hissed to Jennifer. "Yes, you can. He insists." Somehow, Autumn found herself in a chair next to Theodore Whitmore, facing a sea of cameras and curious faces. Her hands trembled in her lap. Theodore tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for coming. 2 weeks ago, I was attacked and left for dead in an alley. A young woman found me and saved my life, not knowing who I was or what I could offer her in return. She sacrificed her possessions, her time, and risked her own safety to help a stranger. That young woman is Autumn Hayes, and she's sitting beside me today." Cameras flashed. Autumn wanted to disappear. "I've spent the past 2 weeks thinking about what her selfless action means, and I've come to a conclusion. We live in a world that doesn't adequately value or support the people who care for others. Nurses, first responders, teachers. They're overworked, underpaid, and often forced to choose between their calling and their survival." Autumn was working 3 jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA in her nursing program. She ate 1 meal a day. She was drowning in debt from her mother's cancer treatment, and she still stopped to save my life. Theodore paused, letting his words sink in. "Today I'm announcing the establishment of the Lily Whitmore Foundation, named after my late granddaughter. This foundation will provide full scholarships, housing, and living stipends to nursing and medical students across the country. We're starting with an initial endowment of $5 billion. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Autumn's jaw dropped. Additionally, Whitmore Industries will be partnering with hospitals nationwide to establish better pay standards, reasonable working hours, and mental health support for healthcare workers. Because no one should have to sacrifice their well-being to care for others." He turned to Autumn, his eyes bright. "And Autumn Hayes will be joining the foundation's board of directors once she graduates, helping to ensure these programs actually serve the students who need them most." The room erupted with questions, but Autumn couldn't hear them over the roaring in her ears. $5 billion, a foundation, board of directors. Later, after the press conference ended, and they sat in Theodore's office overlooking the city, Autumn finally found her voice. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did," Theodore said simply. "You showed me that goodness still exists in this world, Autumn. Real, uncalculated kindness. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. What's the point of it if I can't use it to create more people like you?" Autumn looked out at the city sprawling below, thinking about all the students who were right now where she'd been 2 weeks ago. Exhausted, broke, terrified, but still showing up every day to learn how to save lives. The foundation will really help them? It will help thousands of them, tens of thousands eventually, and they'll become the nurses and doctors and first responders who help millions. You didn't just save one life in that alley, Autumn. You set off a chain reaction that's going to echo for generations. That evening, Autumn returned to her new condo and sat on her couch, an actual couch, not a mattress on the floor, and cried. She cried for her mother who'd never lived to see this. She cried for every meal she'd skipped, every night she'd studied until dawn, every moment she'd wondered if she'd make it. She cried for Lily Whitmore, who'd died too young, and for Theodore, who'd turned his grief into something meaningful. And she cried for herself, for the girl who'd stopped in the rain simply because someone needed help, never imagining that one act of kindness would change everything. 6 months later, the Lily Whitmore Foundation announced its first class of scholarship recipients. 200 nursing students across 15 states, each one freed from the burden of debt and survival, each one able to focus entirely on becoming the healthcare provider they dreamed of being. Autumn attended the ceremony and met a young woman named Brooklyn from rural Montana, a first-generation college student working 4 jobs before the scholarship found her. Brooklyn hugged Autumn and whispered, "Thank you for saving him. You saved all of us too." And Autumn finally understood what Theodore had meant that day in his office. Kindness had a ripple effect. One choice, made in a moment when it would have been easier to walk away, had transformed not just her life, but countless others. She still thought about that night in the rain sometimes. The weight of Theodore's dying body, the cold seeping into her bones, the fear that she'd lose him. But mostly she thought about what came after. The reminder that goodness gets rewarded sometimes, that one person really can make a difference, and that the best thing you can do with a second chance at life is to make sure others get one too. The poor student who saved a dying billionaire became the foundation director who saved thousands. And everyone who heard the story understood that the real shock wasn't what Theodore did for Autumn. It was what they did together for everyone else. 5 years after that rain-soaked night on Bennett Avenue, Autumn Hayes stood in the main auditorium of the newly constructed Whitmore Medical Education Center, watching 2,000 nursing students file in for their white coat ceremony. The building itself was a testament to what could happen when resources met genuine need. State-of-the-art simulation labs, comfortable study spaces, an on-site counseling center, and subsidized housing for students who needed it. Everything she'd wished for during those grueling years of survival. Her phone buzzed. A text from Theodore. Watching the live stream from home. Wish I could be there in person. Make me proud. Autumn smiled, though her chest tightened with familiar concern. Theodore had never fully recovered from that night in the alley. The attack had taken more from him than just blood. It had aged him, weakened him. At 79, he'd stepped back from most of his duties at Whitmore Industries, spending his days at his estate, video calling into foundation meetings, and writing lengthy emails about program improvements at odd hours of the night. You're already proud, she texted back. Rest. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor yet, he replied, and she could hear the amusement in his words. But she would be soon. After completing her nursing degree with honors, Autumn had been accepted into medical school, fully funded by the Foundation's Advanced Education Program. She was finishing her residency in emergency medicine, the specialty that had chosen her that night in the alley when she'd fought to save a stranger's life. Somehow she balanced her medical training with her role on the Foundation's board, driven by the same relentless energy that had once been fueled by desperation, but was now powered by purpose. The ceremony began. Autumn watched as Brooklyn, the young woman from Montana she'd met at that first scholarship ceremony, took the stage as the student speaker. Brooklyn had graduated 2 years ago and was now working as a pediatric nurse in an underserved community, touching lives every single day. She spoke about the foundation with tears in her eyes, about being given a chance when she'd been ready to give up, about the ripple effect of kindness. After the ceremony, Autumn stood in the lobby, shaking hands with students, parents, and faculty. An older woman approached her, weathered hands clutching a program. Ms. Hayes, I'm Elena Rodriguez. My daughter Sophia is receiving her scholarship today. The woman's voice cracked. She works at the same diner where you used to work. She tells me you left your name tag in the break room when you quit, and she sees it every shift. Says it reminds her that things can get better. Autumn hugged the woman, this stranger who somehow felt like family. They do get better. Tell Sophia I'm rooting for her. That evening, Autumn drove to Theodore's estate on the outskirts of the city. She'd been making the trip weekly for the past year, usually bringing dinner and staying to watch old movies or argue about foundation policies. Their relationship had evolved into something neither of them quite had words for. Not quite family, not quite friendship, but something deeper. A bond forged in blood and gratitude and mutual respect. Theodore was in his study, surrounded by papers. He looked tired but content. The ceremony was beautiful, he said. 2,000 more nurses entering the workforce without debt hanging over their heads. Do you know what that means? That they can actually afford to eat? Autumn joked, settling into her usual chair. That they'll stay in the profession. Retention rates for our scholarship recipients are 43% higher than the national average. They're not burning out and quitting after 3 years because they're not already exhausted from just surviving. He leaned back. We're changing the entire healthcare landscape, Autumn, one student at a time. You changed it, Autumn corrected. I just stopped in the rain. No, Theodore's voice was firm. You showed me what was worth changing. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. I've been working on something, my will. My lawyers hate it. My board is in an uproar, but I don't particularly care what they think anymore. Autumn's stomach dropped. Theodore, I'm not dying tomorrow, relax, but I'm not getting younger either, and I want things settled. He pushed a document across the desk. I'm leaving controlling interest in Whitmore Industries to a trust that will fund the foundation in perpetuity. You're named as one of 3 trustees. I can't. You can. You will. And you'll make sure that long after I'm gone, that foundation keeps doing what it was always meant to do. His gray eyes held hers. You gave me 5 extra years, Autumn. 5 years I've spent doing the most meaningful work of my life. That's not a debt I can ever repay, but I can make sure your legacy extends as far as mine. Autumn's vision blurred. My legacy? Theodore, You're just the woman who changed everything, he interrupted gently. Don't diminish that. Don't ever diminish that. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set beyond the windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Autumn thought about the girl she'd been 5 years ago, desperate, exhausted, running through the rain to a job she hated, carrying the weight of impossible debt and impossible dreams. She thought about the choice she'd made to stop, to help, to care when it cost her something. That choice had given her everything. But more than that, it had given thousands of others everything too. Thank you, she said quietly, for seeing me, for believing I was worth all this. Theodore smiled, the same smile from that hospital room so many years ago. Thank you for proving that kindness still exists in this world. Everything else just followed from that. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Inside, a billionaire and the nursing student who'd saved him sat together. 2 lives forever intertwined by a rainy night and a choice that had echoed across 5 years and counting. A choice that would keep echoing long after both of them were gone. In every student who received a scholarship, every nurse who stayed in the profession, every patient who received care from someone who hadn't been broken by the system that was supposed to prepare them to heal. The ripples kept spreading, and they always would.